Tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salilo Makwidir. The time is 22 minutes past 9, and we're going to be shifting gears now to what I think is a very, very important topic. The killing hasn't stopped. We've just stopped watching. These are the searing words of Professor Mark Tomlinson, whose recent piece lays bare the moral paralysis that's gripping the world as the bombardment of Gaza continues. In the piece, he writes out of guilt, a guilt born not only from what's happening, but from how little is being done to stop it. As thousands and thousands of civilians are killed in what is essentially a genocide that is live streamed, entire families being wiped out, and the UN reporting on horror after all horror that they are documenting on the ground in Gaza. Professor Tomlinson asks, has the world become numb to Palestinian suffering? Have we stopped seeing them? Or worse, are we just choosing to look away? This morning on News and Views, we speak to Professor Tomlinson. He's the co-director at the Institute for Life Course Health Research at Stellenbosch University, about his very, very provocative piece and what he calls the defining moral issue of our time. And we can all agree that Palestine is that. It is the defining moral issue of our time. And we'll be unpacking a lot of issues, we'll be unpacking what it does it mean, to bear witness in the face of such barbarism. And if we are against this, and most importantly, what are we going to do about it? Prof, thank you so much for joining us. It's really, really a pleasure chatting to you this morning. I think a really wonderful piece that you wrote, and looking forward to dissect it and to chat a bit about it.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
Prof, you opened your piece, I think, with a very, very powerful admission. When I was reading the piece, you start off by saying, "I write this out of guilt." Why that emotion specifically, and what does it tell us about the times that we're living through at this current moment?
I suppose I write that. Part of it was about reading that book. I quote in the piece. There's that where the writer himself speaks about a sense of guilt and how kind of is writing about something, is thinking about something, is that enough in the face of terrible horror, and what is quite patently and just to say, I certainly didn't invent the term, the defining moral issue of our time. I think lots of people are saying that and have said that. I was simply continuing their words. And in the context of that, what happens? I try to write about it. I feel, I live in Cape Town. I'm very privileged, and I've often felt that as a privileged white academic, at the very least, I can write about it and perhaps at times say things that other people might be scared of, because we know the consequences for many people when they do speak out. And so I started writing about this, following October the 7th. I wrote a number of pieces, and my media feeds, the things I was reading for a lot of last year, I wasn't seeking it out, but it was there, and I felt that felt different to previous times in which terrible things have been happening in Gaza, where there would be this very brief media coverage, and then it would just disappear. And this felt, and obviously this what's been happening in the last year and a half is quite unique, I think. And then suddenly it seemed to stop, and I suddenly realized what's actually going on. And I could go out, and because I'm interested, because I'm concerned, I could find information, but it wasn't there. And so I just got thinking, like, what's actually happened? Have people just got bored? Have people moved on to other things? And I tried to include those in the piece. I include a number of bullets from a UN, kind of humanitarian update that used to, I think, in the beginning of 2024, was a sort of a daily update that became every 2 weeks, and just to give an indication of what was still happening, to really make the case. And so I then reading, the book, kind of The World After Gaza, and just thinking, well, like, what am I doing? And just this real searing sense of guilt, I suppose. At whatever I do, I suspect it's not going to be enough, but I really have to try and do something. So I suppose that's where the guilt came from.
Very, very important, that you mentioned that report, and the frequency of it. And at a time where I think things in Gaza are worse than they've ever been before. Um, my next point, on the piece is you referencing Carl Jasper's concept of metaphysical guilt. A deep awareness of our impotence in the face of barbarism. What does that mean in the context of Gaza today, especially for those of us watching from so afar, but still deeply resonate with the struggle of the people of Palestine, and as South Africans, how it is in a lot of ways intertwined with our own history here at home?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's so entwined. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't need to say that to you or anyone in
Yeah.
South Africa. I mean, it's no accident that some of the most vocal supporters of the Palestinian cause, of the Palestinian state, are countries like South Africa, Ireland, in terms of what they went through, Spain, lots of issues around, separatism and all the kinds of things that go with that. So it's no accident that these are the countries who know intimately what's going on, and because there was an experience for many people, for generations, hundreds of years, not just since 1948 in South Africa, for example, and for me, the sort of the I mean, one of the things that I find a lot of people say to me, why do I write about Gaza? Why am I not writing about South Sudan? Things that are going, and my response is, well, actually, I do work in those countries. I'm kind of there actually, and I'm seeing a lot of what's happening, and but there's something very specific about what's happening, where a country can do what they're doing to people in Gaza and receive 2,000-pound bombs from the richest and most powerful country in the world. And if you object to that in any way whatsoever, then somehow it's a problem. And that's, I think, what makes it a defining moral issue. And I think that's where, if you're not thinking about it and you're not engaging with it, that I think that you have to engage in some kind of either active myth making in your head about why you're not thinking about it, or you just have to. And I think this is probably, and I don't want to, it's easy to judge people. I don't want to judge people. Everyone's got their struggles, but it feels like there's often an active, I'm not going there. I don't want to think about it. It's too much. And so I'm just going to, put the shutters down. I mean, in the term I use, put the veil down. I'm not going there. And I think that's where the metaphysical, that actually, I think there's something really important about, and Elon Musk notwithstanding, I do believe in empathy. I think that empathy is one of our most, natural, real human emotions, and to feel something, and to talk about it and to think about it. It isn't enough, and I have that guilt. But at the same time, I remember early on in the genocide, there were a number of poets, and I can't give you a name off the top of my head, and people in Gaza just saying, like, especially when South Africa went to to the Hague, was, thank you. Not that they expected that there was going to be any quick, answer from the International Court of Justice, that anything massive was going to change as a result. But I think it's profound when you are that attacked, that there are people thinking, trying to do something, acting in however, kind of in whatever way it might be. And we all have to just do our, whatever we can. And I think that people in Gaza were saying, that's important and thank you. And so I suppose that for me is part of what I try and do, is just talk about it, think about it deeply, feel it, and yeah, but it doesn't make some of that guilt go away, I suppose.
You don't just critique the political powers behind this brutality and this genocide that it's unfolding in front of us. But you also take aim at I think it was Steve Bannon who calls it, flooding the zone with, he used colorful language, but not nonsense, essentially. How has and I think this is important. How has the disinformation era made it easier to hide genocide literally in plain sight when it's live streamed, and the numbers and the modus operandi of the pariah apartheid state of Israel is being displayed in full view of everyone to see?
Yeah. I mean, Steve, so the person I was referencing is Steve Bannon, who was briefly in Trump's first term. He has a website, and I mean, he's a I think he's a dreadful human being, but he's a brilliant, dreadful human being, and he knows about disinformation and how it can be used. And his idea is that the media. So if you think about, let's use yesterday as an example. I can't off the top of my head say what Israel exactly did in the morning yesterday, but by the afternoon, all our media was then flooded with Trump and his ambush of Ramaphosa and his bizarre white supremacist, conspiracy theories. And anything that happened before in that day is now overwhelmed by that. And I'll put money on the table to say that by this evening, today, there'll be something else that Trump will have done to again flood the zone with anything, and so the media is by definition can't cover 300 stories all in a day. And so the idea being that if you flood it, they'll pick on one thing, and then, and this is Steve Bannon, you then in the background can do whatever you want to do. So that's what Trump is a genius at. He's a genius at keeping himself on the stage, saying whatever lie, rubbish he can come up with, while his henchmen are in the background then doing the bidding and getting things passed, sending people to prisons, in other countries. And so that's this, and with social media and the way and it's become atomized, and so people in their groups, the algorithm knows exactly what to send to every person, and so people are just flooded. And in those situations, I think it's hard to think. It's hard to stop and imagine, be creative in your thinking, because then the next thing's there, and then the next thing's there, and I have enormous sympathy for anyone trying to do that. And how do you make sense of all of everything that's happening?
I want to go back to, I think, a line that we opened with in this conversation. Gaza being the defining moral issue of our time. What, in your view, would it mean for someone to respond morally to the Gaza issue? Beyond the hashtags and the headlines and everything else, what would it be? A morally acceptable, at least for yourself, response to the Gaza issue be?
First, I think is open your eyes. People to read, to think about what's happening. I largely came into thinking very deeply about this. All the research I do is with children, adolescents, and trying to understand what happens to people, families, kind of in adversity. So I came in as a sort of, I suppose, as a child advocate, and at the simple horror of the numbers of children being slaughtered on a daily basis is impossible not to see in my mind. And yet people seem able to do that and seem able to come up with their own explanations, that somehow justify that. So for me, the first act is seeing, the British government yesterday actually, for the first time, seeing in a way. And I don't pretend to say that now that's going to make that this means they're going to do X, Y, and Z, but it's a start. They're acknowledging it. They're saying we're gonna break some ties. We're actually going to do some stuff. It's not acceptable. I don't know how anyone can see, think about 25, 30, 40,000 children being killed, and in those pictures you're showing the level of trauma of these children. I also do work in trauma, and what these and if you think about many adolescents in Gaza, this is not the first invasion they've been through. Their life is one of habitual, of habitual invasions and trauma. I find it. I can't believe how you can't see that. And so that for me almost is just see it and say that it's not okay. And that's a start of something. I don't pretend to know the answer, and how this gets solved, but I do think the first thing in when something is so patently immoral is to start seeing and thinking about it differently.
And I'm really glad you're making that point, because I was having a discussion with some colleagues yesterday, specifically on that, on how Britain has responded, and they were like, this is just symbolic, it's just for show, it's theater, it don't have any kind of real tangible effect on the ground. They're still selling arms to Israel, and they have not severed bilateral ties, and I'm like, we come from a place where they wouldn't even accept, that there's anything that resembles a genocide in Gaza. And this is a start. Granted, it's a sanction against a few individuals. It's trade talks that might not lead anywhere, but it's a start. It's similar to the ICJ case that South Africa has presented, as you mentioned. It was never about seeing change tomorrow, having Benjamin Netanyahu understand the next day and having him locked up for life, which I think is what everyone would, appreciate and would all celebrate if that happens. But it was about a moment where, for the first time, Israel is put on a world stage and is meant to answer. So thank you so much for that. I think it's very, very important that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I can also just add. So I can also just add. I mean, I also think that, like, one of the things I because I work with young people, I'm also very aware of, I'm an adult, who am I to speak for children? So I think there's also a level that I also feel sometimes like, who am I at all? I've never been to Gaza. A very good friend of mine has been a number of times. I haven't been to Gaza. Who am I to say anything? And I suppose also is when I completely agree with your colleagues in that. I doubt the action of the British government is going to lead to much in the short term. We also know that when South Africa took that case to ICC, I think the ICC on some big cases has taken about 2.5 years to come to the main decision. Everyone knew that. I would love to know from people in Gaza, do they think, is it important for them that Britain said that? And if they say it is, then that's good enough for me. And I don't know that. I'm not saying I don't have any, but there's also that as well. Of course, it's probably, South Africa's we're not entirely like guilt-free. Yeah, we do a lot of trading with Israel. Let's all just face that. So we're not also, so I'm not defending the British government, but I would, I know that what people in Gaza were saying about South Africa's case, when they see that from Britain, is that important? Do they feel that makes them feel a little bit more seen and a little bit more heard? And if they do, then any of my opinions, I'll almost keep quiet about that, because that's the important thing.
No, definitely. I want to wrap up the conversation with this, and this is something that I've also personally just struggled with for a very, very long time. You've said that, writing the piece was in some ways a vain and impotent contribution from afar, and behind the mic, producing shows and conversations like this, I feel that. I feel like, okay, we've spoken, and what now? Yesterday, my colleagues and I attended a Shireen Abu Akleh lecture at UJ Business School. And while I was in the car with them and we were talking about it, I mentioned how unfulfilled I always feel after these conversations I had. And it's something that I've struggled with it for a very, very long time. But with your piece, as much as you've mentioned that in some ways it was a vain and impotent contribution from afar, yet we are here. We are reading it, we're talking about it. Do you still feel that way, or do you believe there's some sort of power in bearing witness, in speaking out, even when the machines of war just keep on grinding on?
It's a very good question. So by training, I'm a clinical psychologist. So I'm not gonna therapize you or anything, but
Mm,
but I do believe in process. I believe that the very fact, and I don't mean this to sound patronizing or trite, but if the very fact that you feel that we have these conversations is the point, and it's not enough, but it's as much as I can do right now, and I'm going to keep doing that, and maybe part of the eventual solution, because the world, there's 8 billion people. I don't know what's going to happen. It's about keeping doing that. I heard a quote in a podcast the other day about a new book about that's been published recently about rivers, and the first part of the book it describes Ecuador. And I hope this is not too much of a offshoot, but the person writing the book, and Ecuador is the country that is the first country in the world to declare rivers to have human rights like humans.
mm-hmm.
So they must be protected, which is a wild thing, but like it's amazing, whatever. And the person who wrote the book quotes an indigenous person in Ecuador, and I might get this slightly wrong, but whatever. It's something like this. It's despair is a privilege, hope is a discipline, and
Mm,
that for me is what it's about. Like literally, who am I in my utter privilege, sitting in a hotel in London, working as a professor? Who am I to get despairing? And I mean, really, I'd like,
mm,
just get over yourself if I was. And so I just have to hope, and I have to, and hope is about fighting. Hope is about acting, about agency, about trying to do whatever you can do. Because actually having no hope is just, yeah, I mean, that actually is just a privilege, really. So don't go
mm.
there. So that would be how I would answer that. So keep having those conversations. That's all we can do. And
No, definitely. And our conversation has unfortunately come to an end, Prof. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and looking forward to other, eye-opening, engaging conversations in the not so distant future.
thanks so much for your kindness. Thank you.
Uh, that was Professor Mark Tomlinson. He's a co-director of the Institute for Life Cause Health Research in the Department of Global Health at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Science at Stellenbosch University. Please check out his piece. It's on Daily Maverick. It's titled "The Moral Imperative: Confronting the Unseen Horrors of Gaza Amidst Global Indifference." And yeah, talk about guilt. Yeah, I think guilt is not just a feeling. It is a mirror that shows us what we've ignored, what we've tolerated, and what we've allowed to continue by doing nothing. So, just listening, talking to Professor Mark Tomlinson and reading that piece, and him saying that he writes from guilt, uh, it's not the guilt of passivity. I think it's the guilt that wakes you up. It's the guilt that compels you to speak, to act, to refuse to look away. Because Gaza is not a distant tragedy, guys. It is a moral reckoning, and if you feel nothing, if you feel no guilt, if you feel no sense of uneasiness or no outrage, then perhaps that silence within you is where the real collapse begins. So yeah, I know there's a lot of us. I know that there's a sense of guilt that I feel always. Before I go to bed, have I done enough? Have I spoken enough? Have I acted enough? Not just for Gaza, for South Africans here at home, for the rest of the continent. I just hope that we don't let this guilt paralyze us, but kind of helps us move, you know, help propels us. Say, I'm tired of feeling guilty. I wanna do something tangible. Yeah, that's the parting shot. This guilt that we always feel, let it not be a whisper we bury, but a voice that demands. that demands that all of this that's happening, this genocide that we're witnessing, it is not going to happen in our name. And to reiterate Nelson Mandela, never, never, and never again. We're going to take a quick break. News and Views continues after this.